The cyborgs among us. To date, the man with a pacemaker or a plastic aorta is still recognisably a man. The inanimate part of his body is still relatively unimportant in terms of his personality and consciousness. But as the proportion of machine components rises, what happens to his awareness of self, his inner experience? If we assume that the brain is the seat of consciousness and intelligence, and that no other part of the body affects personality or self very much, then it is possible to conceive of a disembodied brain, a brain without arms, legs, spinal cord, or other equipment, as a self, a personality, an embodiment of awareness. It may then become possible to combine the human brain with a whole set of artificial sensors, receptors, and effectors, and to call that tangle of wires and plastic a human being. All this may seem to resemble medieval speculation about the number of angels who can pirouette on a pinhead, yet the first small steps towards some form of man-machine symbiosis are already being taken. Moreover, they are being taken not by a lone mad scientist, but by thousands of highly trained engineers, mathematicians, biologists, surgeons, chemists, neurologists, and communications specialists. Dr. W. G. Walter's mechanical tortoises are machines that behave as though they had been psychologically conditioned. These tortoises were early specimens of a growing breed of robots ranging from the perceptron, which could learn and even generalise, to the more recent wanderer, a robot capable of exploring an area, building up in its memory an image of the terrain, and able even to indulge in certain operations comparable, at least in some respects, to contemplative speculation and fantasy. Experiments by Ross Ashby, H.D. Block, Frank Rosenblatt, and others demonstrate that machines can learn from their mistakes, improve their performance, and in certain limited kinds of learning outstrip human students. Says Block, Professor of Applied Mathematics at Cornell University. I don't think there's a task you can name that a machine can't do in principle. If you can define a task and a human can do it, then a machine can, at least in theory, also do it. The converse, however, is not true. Intelligence and creativity, it would appear, are not a human monopoly. Despite setbacks and difficulties, the roboteers are moving forward. Recently they enjoyed a collective laugh at the expense of one of the leading critics of the robot builders, a former Rand Corporation computer specialist named Hubert L. Dreyfus. Arguing that computers would never be able to match human intelligence, Dreyfus wrote a lengthy paper heaping vitriolic scorn on those who disagreed with him. Among other things, he declared, no chess program can play even amateur chess. In context, he appeared to be saying that none ever would. Less than 2 years later, a graduate student at MIT, Richard Greenblatt, wrote a chess-playing computer program, challenged Dreyfus to a match, and had the immense satisfaction of watching the computer annihilate Dreyfus to the cheers of the artificial intelligence researchers. In a quite different field of robotology, there is progress too. Technicians at Disneyland have created extremely lifelike computer-controlled humanoids capable of moving their arms and legs, grimacing, smiling, glowering, simulating fear, joy, and a wide range of other emotions. Built of clear plastic that, according to one reporter, does everything but bleed, the robots chase girls, play music, fire pistols, and so closely resemble human forms that visitors routinely shriek with fear, flinch and otherwise react as though they were dealing with real human beings. The purposes to which these robots are put may seem trivial, but the technology on which they are based is highly sophisticated. It depends heavily on knowledge acquired from the space program, and this knowledge is accumulating rapidly. There appears to be no reason in principle why we cannot go forward from these present primitive and trivial robots to build humanoid machines capable of extremely varied behaviour, capable even of human error and seemingly random choice. In short, to make them behaviourally indistinguishable from humans except by means of highly sophisticated or elaborate tests. At that point, we shall face the general sensation of trying to determine whether the smiling, assured humanoid behind the airline reservation counter is a pretty girl or a carefully wired robot. The likelihood, of course, is that she will be both. The thrust towards some form of man-machine symbiosis is furthered by our increasing ingenuity in communicating with machines. A great deal of much publicised work is being done to facilitate the interaction of men and computers. But quite apart from this, Russian and American scientists have both been experimenting with the placement or implantation of detectors that pick up signals from the nerve cells at the stub of an amputated limb. These signals are then amplified and used to activate an artificial limb, thereby making a machine directly and sensitively responsive to the nervous system of a human being. The human need not think out his desires, even involuntary impulses are transmittable. The responsive behaviour of the machine is as automatic as the behaviour of one's own hand, eye, or leg. In Flight to Arras, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the novelist, poet, and pioneer aviator, described buckling himself into the seat of a fighter plane during World War II. All this complication of oxygen tubes, heating equipment, these speaking tubes that form the intercom running between the members of the crew, this mask through which I breathe, I am attached to the plane by a rubber tube as indispensable as an umbilical cord. Organs have been added to my being, and they seem to intervene between me and my heart. We have come far since these distant days. Space biology is marching irresistibly towards the day when the astronaut will not merely be buckled into his capsule, but become part of it in the full symbiotic sense of the phrase. One aim is to make the craft itself a wholly self-sufficient universe in which algae is grown for food, water is recovered from body waste, air is recycled to purge it of the ammonia entering the atmosphere from urine, etc. In this totally enclosed, fully regenerative world, the human being becomes an integral part of an ongoing microecological process, whirling through the vastness of space. Thus, Theodore Gordon, author of The Future, and himself a leading space engineer, writes, "Perhaps it would be simpler to provide life support in the form of machines that plug into the astronaut. He could be fed intravenously using a liquid food compactly stored in a remote pressurized tank. Perhaps direct processing of body liquid wastes and conversion to water could be accomplished by a new type of artificial kidney built in as part of the spaceship. Perhaps sleep could be induced electronically to lower his metabolism." One after another, the body functions of the human become interwoven with, dependent on, and part of the machine functions of the capsule. The ultimate extension of such work, however, is not necessarily to be found in the outer reaches of space, it may well become a common part of everyday life here on the mother planet. This is the direct link-up of the human brain, stripped of its supporting physical structures, with the computer. Indeed, it may be that the biological component of the supercomputers of the future may be massed human brains. The possibility of enhancing human and machine intelligence by linking them together organically opens enormous and exciting probabilities, so exciting that Dr. R. M. Page, director of the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, has publicly discussed the feasibility of a system in which human thoughts are fed automatically into the storage unit of a computer to form the basis for machine decision making. Participants in a Rand Corporation study conducted several years ago were asked when this development might occur. Answers ranged from as soon as 1990 to never, but the median date given was 2020, well within the lifetime of today's teenagers. In the meantime, research from countless sources contributes towards the eventual symbiosis. In one of the most fascinating, frightening, and intellectually provocative experiments ever recorded, Professor Robert White, Director of Neurosurgery at the Metropolitan General Hospital in Cleveland, has given evidence that the brain can be isolated from its body and kept alive after the death of the rest of the organism. The experiment, described in a brilliant article by Oriana Fallaci, saw a team of neurosurgeons cut the brain out of a rhesus monkey, discard the body, then hook the brain's carotid arteries up to another monkey, whose blood then continued to bathe the disembodied organ, keeping it alive. Just an aside, experiments on animals of this kind just turn my stomach. Awful. Back to the book. Said one of the members of the medical team, Dr. Leo Massopust, Massopust, a neurophysiologist. The brain activity is largely better than when the brain had a body, no doubt about it. I even suspect that without his senses he can think more quickly. What kind of thinking, I don't know. I guess he is primarily a memory, a repository for information stored when he had his flesh. He cannot develop further because he no longer has the nourishment of experience, yet this too is a new experience. The brain survived for 5 hours. It could have lasted much longer had it served the purposes of research. Professor White has successfully kept other brains alive for days, using machinery rather than a living monkey to keep the brain washed with blood. I don't think we have reached the stage, he told Miss Fallaci, where you can turn men into robots, obedient sheep. Yet, it could happen. It isn't impossible. If you consider that we can transfer the head of a man onto the trunk of another man, if you consider that we can isolate the brain of a man and make it work without its body, to me there is no longer any gap between science fiction and science. We could keep Einstein's brain alive and make it function normally. As the brain surgeons and the neurologists probe further, I'm sorry, I've missed out a paragraph, I'll go back. Not only Professor White implies can we transfer the head of one man to the shoulders of another, not only can we keep a head or a brain alive and functioning, but it can all be done with existing techniques. Indeed, he declares, the Japanese will be the first to keep an isolated human head alive. I will not, because I haven't resolved as yet this dilemma. Is it right or not? A devout Catholic, Dr. White is deeply troubled by the philosophical and moral implications of his work. As the brain surgeons and the neurologists probe further, as the bioengineers and the mathematicians, the communications experts and robot builders become more sophisticated, as the spacemen and their capsules grow closer and closer to one another, as machines begin to embody biological components and men come bristling with sensors and mechanical organs, the ultimate symbiosis approaches. The work converges. Yet the greatest marvel of all is not organ transplantation or symbiosis or underwater engineering. It is not technology nor science itself. The greatest and most dangerous marvel of all is the complacent past orientation of the race, its unwillingness to confront the reality of acceleration. Thus man moves swiftly onto an unexplored universe, into a totally new stage of eco-technological development, firmly convinced that human nature is eternal, or that stability will return. He stumbles into the most violent revolution in human history, muttering in the words of one famous though myopic sociologist that the process of modernization has been more or less completed. He simply refuses to imagine the future. I found that section quite difficult to read because those descriptions of those experiments with rhesus monkeys just truly horrified me. So I was a bit unsettled. Apologies for that.